This is a kind of good example of a project because it actually used a whole lot of different visualization techniques. So when we were talking about what does the city of the future look like, these are just straight photoshopped kind of images of what it might look like. You know, what does the G2 gas plant look like? How do we get it looking like a cityscape? And then this is a very different thing that you're presenting to the client as the finished package. But the other things are kind of work in progress. See if I can find the, because what this section was doing was actually tracking the history of the astrolabe. So it started as the flat astrolabe, then went into the hemispherical, which is what you
saw pop up.
So right. This is me explaining to the director what this object's going to do.
Right.
And the colours are just, they don't mean anything. They're just showing sections of it.
Right. It also shows the possibilities of light. Right.
Yeah, could not so much in this process. That happens later. And another kind of different animal is looking at the cauldron, which where was it? This is the one I called the Cecil B. DeMille version of lighting the cauldron because it has all the design elements, but it's somebody sitting in Doha doing, their version of what this looks like. Well, the design elements are there, but things are happening at a ridiculous speed, basically. So this is another stage that I designed on opposite the Emir. So this is the very top of the stadium. And here comes the cauldron. Going at a ridiculously fast speed.
Defying all physics.
And it's interesting, this effect here, which is the starburst as the first ignition phase, is actually something we cut, which for budgetary reasons. But on a $15 million project, it's funny that you still have things that you got to. So then it becomes the atom /
right.
astrolabe, and it stayed like that for the duration of the games.
And I'm sorry, but what was the project again?
This is the Asian Games, and they're second only to the Olympics in terms of scale. In fact, we had quite a lot more money for this than the Olympics. Well, at that time, this is 2006, and that was 150 million US for the opening ceremony.
And how do you get that job? How does that work in your life? I mean, come on, let's be honest. Let's focus on the Asian Games. How does that process work?
Well, I did the Sydney Olympics. I did the Cauldron for the Olympics in Sydney that Kathy Freeman lit, and David Atkins, who was the director of the opening and closing, went on to become the producer for this event. And so he just asked me to come and do another Cauldron initially. But as it turned out, I ended up doing a pretty big whack of the opening ceremony.
And how does it divide up? I mean, when you say a whack.
Well, they... it depends on the project, but normally there'll be a number of designers working on the opening, and you basically take chunks of it. So I did the Arab science section, and so I did all of the stages, all of the Arab science City of the Future cultural section, and the Cauldron. So I had 3 very meaty lumps. And all the ceremonial stages and all that. So I basically planned the layout of the stadium.
So your lump.
Yeah.
And then for yourself, I mean, is it what's the first set of meetings, or who are you? How do you start?
Well, I think this is kind of this one here, which is the development of the Cauldron, I think is a really good example as well, because I went to Doha and one of the Emir's brothers is an avid collector of Arab, objects basically, and had built at that point in time a very large museum and had completely filled the museum with objects. In fact, he'd filled the museum and was then building another one because he just wanted to keep on. And it was all for his own, it was a personal, private museum. Anyway, they allowed us to go in there, and I found, in this particular case, there was a shield. And I was looking at that and thinking, well, actually, what we're playing with the Cauldron is the initial rising sun motif. And that's a kind of perfect segue into that idea. But also looking at the combination of brass, silver and copper, which is very relevant to that particular region and how they deal with precious metals and,
Okay.
So that was a starting point. And then I just looked at other things that I was playing within the Arab science section, the City of the Future, and thinking about astrolabes and how they moved. And then I work in AutoCAD in 2D, so I just start sketching out ideas. So the first thing was to trace the pattern off the shield and kind of start playing with what that might end up becoming. And these are kind of doodles, but I'm not entirely sure where it's going, but it's heading somewhere.
Right.
And then what might this look like in the context of the stadium? Didn't end up like that, but it sort of gives me a sense of scale. And this is the kind of first draft of the design, so that's the astrolabe version of it. The main burner, the rising sun motif. So that's it, the sun, that's the atom. And I had also done this other tower that a young boy was lifted up in the stadium holding the astrolabe with a laser astrolabe above that. So it was kind of a, virtual.
Right.
So all of this was sort of connecting back into that.
Sure. No, it's such a tight theme and yet so expressive. And really
So there you can see the height of the stadium, how far we actually had to lift it. And again, this is my first draft, and this is before talking to engineers and getting feedback about structural sizes, redundancy, all that sort of stuff. So anyway, it got the package underway, and this is the developed package once I'd had those discussions in Sydney with an engineering firm. And so this.
And you jumped from 2D AutoCAD to 3D AutoCAD at some point, didn't you?
Well,
to
what's
develop
happening
that, or
now?
no, I don't know.
Well, this guy Andrew Chan I was talking to you about.
Oh yeah.
I
right.
sent the 2Ds, and once I've sent him the 2Ds, everything from there is a kind of dialogue with him about what adjustments we need to make. So I'm having the discussions with the engineer, and we're going, well, actually, this needs to become 600 rather than 300 or whatever, and that gets fed back to Andrew. So these are now Andrew's drawings that went out as the package to what ended up being Show Canada in Montreal, who built it. But you can see there are venting areas built into that. Here are the vents on the top of that ring to draw some of the heat away. Those are the phases. This is this is Show Canada sending back to me for approval the finishes as I described them. So that's their render of what they thought I was looking for. And then that's the sun motif version. And then it's back to that. Then you're thinking, well, how do we light this?
I was just thinking, how does the horse climb the incline? That was really what I was thinking.
Well, we had the Amir's youngest son happened to be the captain of the equestrian team.
Of course.
Which didn't mean he was necessarily a great rider, but it just
Right.
meant that... Anyway, so he... we were just thinking about different ways he could carry the flame up the stadium. This is 26.5 degree gradient.
Right.
You've seen that one, but going very, very
The
fast.
fastest disjointed horse
Yes,
ever.
that's right. Yeah. Off she goes. So, and this one's, I was talking about the technical animation which we had to do for the Emir, which is actually in true time once the engineering's been done to it. Ooh, where did that go? Sorry. I'll just push that along, but you can see how much slower it actually goes in reality.
Yeah.
And I guess you kind of sitting there thinking, oh God, that feels really slow. But in a stadium, it's a monumental thing lifting up, and
For sure.
actually gave it gravitas rather than. And this is already starting to think about potential camera angles for shooting the event. I've looked at more flame tests in my life than I care to. So this
Who
is
knew when you were choosing to be a stenographer that you would be just dealing with how much gas?
well, this is actually a company I work with quite a lot in Adelaide called FCT, Foreign Combustion Technology. And their bread and butter is building industrial burners, but they've now gone on to do pretty well every Olympic Games, Cauldron. They did the ring cycle with me, a whole lot of things. But this is actually 1 to 10 scale of the real thing. So, and here's the real thing in Adelaide. Doing a test burn. It's basically like building a rocket ship, really. So this is it being built in Montreal on the shop floor.
Why Montreal?
Well, the whole gig got parcelled out around the world.
It was a bidding.
Yeah,
I mean, just
yeah.
sure.
So I had stuff being built in York in the UK, in Switzerland, in Montreal, in Greece, Sydney. So this is what's called an FAT, which is a factory automation testing. And so we found an empty building site near the factory, assembled it, and just checked that the mechanisms would actually work. So this is it arriving in Doha. And friend who was lighting the show took a little time lapse just to show. I wasn't there, so he just did this to show me it being dropped into its receiving building. And this is actually the first horse run. So Australia, who would know, but Australia has the best Arab horses in the world. And so we bought 3 of them and trained them in country New South Wales. And 2 of them ended up being flown to Doha. So this is Malibu, who was the hero horse. And this is Steve Jeffries, who, I don't know if you remember in the Sydney Olympics, but the guy at the front of the cavalcade of horses who cracked the whip. That's
goodness.
Steve.
Wow.
And he's a phenomenal trainer. Anyway, this is the very first time we're trying this run. And he had, we'd built 3 hills in the desert, because Doha is flat. So there was a little hill, a medium hill, and a big hill, and the horses trained each day on those hills. Or, moving from small to bigger and bigger.
Sure. Getting the muscle memory to be built. That's so interesting.
And it's basically building up their hindquarters to deal with this incredibly steep gradient.
Right.
This is David Atkins.